I want to talk about the book of James today. The book of James, you have to look at the big picture of the book of James, and it's something most people miss. The book of James, the main theme of James is man's justification in front of man. A lot of times people like to use the word justification meaning salvation, but it's not what it means. We'll look at that in a minute, but justification before man, not God. A lot of the Bible talks about being justified in God's sight. This is talking about being justified in man's sight. This is the big theme of James. So the idea is in James chapter 2, I'm going to read it here. The idea is we're justified in front of man, other people, by our actions. The use of the word works. The Bible talks about works, your fruit, your actions all mean the same thing. What you do defines you. Your actions, your works, your fruit, all considered the same thing. Those three words mean the same: fruit, action, and works. I want to read it real fast. James chapter 2, verse 14. What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, Depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so, 17, even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Reading the Bible has examples of people who are justifying themselves, but not before God. They're justifying themselves in the sight of man. That's the main theme here. We'll keep going. James chapter 2, verse 19. Thou believest there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Is justified in front of man, not God. Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? The scripture was fulfilled which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Likewise Rahab, it talks about Rahab, what she did, her works. And then ends the chapter with, so faith without works is dead also. So what it's talking about is your faith is dead in the sight of people. It means nothing. It has no effect on anybody if they can't see it. You have to have actions to go with your faith. So let's look at Galatians chapter 22 and see what your actions, your works should be that will make you different from people so they will see your faith. Let's go to Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. In Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit, now the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit means the same thing, your actions, your works. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. So if you're a believer, these are the things that will be part of your life. These are the things that will show. You don't have to try to do them. You don't have to make a list. Years ago, I thought, how do I do that? I looked at that list and I thought I should be trying to do those things. That's not what it means. If you're a believer, your faith will show through your actions, your works, your fruit. I look at it this way. If I was an apple tree, do apple trees have to put effort to make apple trees? Do they have to think about it and dwell on it? No, they make apple trees. They make apples because they're an apple tree. They don't make oranges. I can tell, hey, that's an apple tree because it has an apple on it. So if you see a Christian, that guy's a Christian or woman because look at their actions, look what they do, look at the fruit. So that's how we know. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. Okay, so a Christian can sin, but it should not be very often. For instance, you're defined by your actions. So I say, if a person lies once, you're not called a liar. You lied before. Someone said, yeah, that guy lied, but they don't call you a liar. If you're someone that lies all the time, they're going to say, that guy's a liar. That is something you do all the time. If you stole once, you would not be called a thief. You committed the act of being a thief once, but no one would call you a thief. A thief is someone who just steals all the time. So your actions define you. A Christian should be defined by those things, the fruit of the Spirit. You should be different than people. If you're not different than the people that are not believers, you need to look at yourself and see what there's a problem there. Okay, so we know that the verses that talked about Abraham was justified by his works was not talking about justified before God. It was just talking about justified before people. They could see that. Nobody can see what happens in your heart except God. And I'll have some verses over here talk about Abraham and talking about what God can see your heart and things like that. So you can look them up. Please don't just listen to me. Please read the verses and see if it matches with what I say. I want you to believe in the Bible, not me. Real quickly, in Romans chapter 4, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about, Abraham did not become justified by God by his works. That was justified in front of the sight of man. Romans chapter 4 mentions it quite a few times. Chapter 4, verse 1, all the way down to most of the chapter, actually, down to like verse 12 or so, talks about Abraham was justified before he was circumcised, before he did the work, the actions of circumcision. He was justified before he even thought about or knew about sacrificing Isaac. He was justified because God imputed righteousness to him because he believed God. God told him some promises and he believed it, and God said he's counted that as righteousness. It says here, verse 3, for what saith the scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Now to him that worketh is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. So what it's talking about here is in verse chapters in Romans 4, verse 6, even as David also describeth the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works. So the Bible does not contradict itself. So what it's talking about is justification in front of man in James chapter 2. Justification in front of God was without works. God justifies you by believing in him, in Jesus. It's not anything to do with works. So there's three main reasons people misunderstand the teaching of James here. Number one is, you got to look at the wording here. It says in James chapter 2, what doth it profit the man, my brethren, though a man say, and then down later it says, verse 18 of chapter 2 of James, yea, a man may say. Now, a man can say anything. How do you prove it? That's being justified. How do you justify yourself? We use that word a lot. It's a legal term. A lot of people use it. Justification. You're showing that you're right. You're proving that you're right. You're proving that you're just. That's justification. Doesn't mean just to God. Justification, you could justify yourself to other people. You can justify yourself to a court. You can be justified to God. You're just proving that you're right, or you're proving that you're just. That's what the word means. It does not always mean salvation. So what a man says, a person could say anything. A person could say, I'm a judge, or I'm a president of the United States. Well, how do you prove it? Justification means you can prove it. You can show what you're saying is right. You can say, I'm a millionaire. Well, what does it mean to anybody unless you can prove it? How do you prove it? You got to show people that you're a millionaire. You got to prove it somehow by your lifestyle or what you buy or whatever. But that's being justified. I justified myself because I showed them, because I went and bought a car with cash. That was an expensive car. I'm justified as a millionaire. So justification in this instance is justified in front of man. So you can say anything, but the verses are saying a man says something, but how does a person prove it? That's how you prove it, through your works. Number two, people misunderstand by thinking that this is teaching salvation by works. If you put the Bible together and it seems to contradict itself, it means that you just don't understand it. So when you put it together and say, okay, this looks like it's saying works, but that doesn't go along with these other verses right over here, please look them up. There are other verses that talk about salvation by grace and salvation by faith and believing in Jesus, not by works. So I'll just read real quick Ephesians 2:8-9, a couple of those. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. So it's pretty clear it's not works is how you get saved. So how could that be fitting with James? James is a part of the Bible and it fits, but it's just justification in front of men. The other misunderstanding is the word justified. If you look it up, I have a Webster's 1828 dictionary. The word justified meant to prove right or just. There's a little bit longer explanation, but the basics of it is to prove right or just. The word itself does not mean salvation. So if you take it to always time you read it in the Bible saying something about being justified, think that means salvation, you get some pretty weird doctrine. So you got to look at wording and what the words mean. The word justified means to prove right or just. So when you're reading these now, look at it and say what it's saying, how can man be justified? Okay? And then we'll get a better understanding. So God's the only one that can see our heart. And if we look up the verses over here, please do look them up and read them. If you look up the verses, it talks about God knowing our heart and knows our thoughts. God knows my heart, knows my thoughts. How can I prove my faith, which is something that's invisible to somebody else, unless I have works to show it? So that's what James is talking about. Goodbye.